We're used to hearing Jesus just before he shares the bread and the cup, sharing words to his disciples, and especially in the Gospel of John. There are many things, utterances of Jesus that are so important because they're messages meant for his followers, both in that time and ours. So hear this reading from John chapter 16. In a little while, you will no longer see me. And then some of the disciples said to one another, what does he mean by saying to us, a little while and you will no longer see me? And he had said earlier, because I'm going to the Father. They said, what in the world does he mean by this, a little while? And we do not know what he's talking about. What does he mean by this, a little while stuff? Jesus knew that they wanted to ask him, so he said to them, are you discussing amongst yourselves what I meant when I said a little while and you will no longer see me, and again a little while and you will see me? Very truly, I tell you, you will weep and mourn, but the world will be glad. They'll be happy I'm gone. You'll be weeping and mourning. You'll be plunged into grief but he says, your grief will turn to joy. When a woman is in labor, she has pain because her hour has come. But when her child is born, she no longer remembers the anguish because of the joy of having brought a child into the world. So you have pain now, but I will see you again. Your hearts will rejoice, and no one will be able to rob you of that joy. Everyone who listens to these words or gathers with us in worship in the morning has some notions, some conceptions about God. Some of us carry some notions, some conceptions that are somewhat negative. I've experienced times where I've been in conversation with people struggling to maybe get past or even erase notions or negative notions of God's anger, God's monitoring constantly. And for years, that's a burden that people struggle with. In fact, some people have even given up the notion of this God who exists all around, above us, below us, in us, and interacting with us through people, through his creation. Give that all up. Sometimes I've had people come to a church and begin to confide in me, I'm going to give this one last chance. And if I don't find it here, a sense of a God of love, a God that I can embrace, then it's over for me. And I can't help but feel this pain of the thought of a life just hopeless regarding any conception of God, a relationship with God through his Son, Jesus. In a book called The Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard describes the human quandary. He really picks up a little bit on Henry David Thoreau and some of that theme of how we work with hopelessness in times when there's nothing that lifts us. We feel puny. We feel that which we love is unreachable, unattainable. We become frantic and despairing. In fact, Leo Tolstoy, a great Russian author of the big tome War and Peace, confided that his drive for goodness as a child was erased over time by his experiences in society. Later in life, after overwhelming success as a writer, he nevertheless sank into a psychological paralysis brought on by his vision of the futility of everything. The awareness that the passage of time alone would bring everything that he loved and valued to nothing left him completely hopeless. And for years he lived in that condition until finally he came to faith in a world of God where all that is good is preserved. I sometimes think of the dark side of the moon experience in life. No, I don't mean that Pink Floyd album that's in everybody's top 10. I think of the dark side of the moon, it's in our image of folks who consider those manned orbiting spacecrafts and then coming around and then being able to see the Earth. Sometimes this is kind of a way to describe how God speaks to his people. Sometimes on the dark side of the moon, or in exile, or in the midst of our time of mourning where we don't see the dawn. And in this way, in The Divine Conspiracy, Dallas Willard puts it, central to the understanding and proclamation of the gospel today, and as well in Jesus' own day, is a revisioning of what God's own life is like. It is a great, important task to come to terms with what we really think of God. If Jesus cannot help us with understanding God's life, then he cannot help us to that salvation life that is by faith. But of course, he can, and he does. We, from Jesus, see that God leads a very interesting life, that God is full of joy. Undoubtedly, he's the most joyous being in the entire universe. The abundance of God's love and generosity is inseparable from his love and joy. All the good and beautiful things from which we occasionally drink tiny droplets of soul-exhilarating joy, God continually experiences in all their breadth and depth and riches. Willard describes a story that I can picture very well. It occurred in South Africa. A young man took him to the beaches near his home, near Port Elizabeth in South Africa. And if you've traveled there, you know this area is called the Garden Route, where you're driving along on the southernmost part of the continent of Africa, looking out at the ocean. He said, I was totally unprepared for what my eye would see. I'd seen beaches, or so I thought. But we came up over the rise where the sea and the land opened up, and I stood in almost total silence. And you can kind of imagine in your own life these moments of just awe-struckness. And Dallas Willard goes on to say, I kind of had this thought where I'm thinking, God, you see this all the time. And all kinds of other scenes on other planets all over the universe. God, this must make you joyous. Well, we're going to come back to think a little bit about how Jesus shares with us these outstanding features of God Not a negative notion of God, but understanding, a biblical understanding from Jesus' perspective of what God is like.